Welcome back. In our last tutorial, we were talking about creating object-oriented programming using Android Studio and in the context of a role-playing game. Although we're not going to complete the game, we're just going to get started so you could use it for future projects. And so we started with this idea of creating a class called an entity, and this becomes the basis for pretty much any object in the game. Anything that's a physical object, anything that you may interact with, or might just be sitting on a stage or somewhere, like a rock. Because a rock would have a name and a description, right? But so would characters that you're playing. So would enemies and other kinds of things. Items, weapons, whatever. We all start with this entity class. And so we have a couple of things that we did here. We created a couple of instance variables, name and description. We created some constructor methods. This is a default constructor. So I'm going to comment that. Okay. And then we're going to have a constructor method overload. And what a method overload is when you have two methods that have the same name but allow you to create or do your method in a different way. As long as you have different parameters, okay, that in one from the other, then you can make multiple methods with the same name. And this just allows us to create entities in two different ways. Then we're going to have some instance methods. Okay, so these instance methods are going to have getter and accessor methods. Getter methods are also known as accessor methods. It allows us to access or get to a variable's value. Okay, and so we're going to do also get the description. Now take a look here. Look at this. Once we've created one of these accessor methods, it already gives us opportunity to do setter methods and an accessor method for get description. And that's one of the reasons why I like Android Studio for doing Java projects. Because look at that. It just simplifies things. So there's our two accessor methods. Notice they each return a value, whatever data type that particular instance variable happens to be. So we just have two strings, name and description. Later on for characters, we're going to have health and a bunch of other things. We'll add that to it, but we'll deal with that in the other classes. So those are our two getter methods, also known as accessor methods. And you'll never guess why we come up with the term getter method. Yeah, I don't think you'll ever figure that one out. So, oh, it's because they have this word called get, and it gets us the value. Yeah, you probably would have never figured that one out. Never. All right, we also have our setter methods. You'll never guess what word a setter method starts with. I'm sure you'll never know.
Oh, does it have, like, get in it?
Almost. All right. Setter methods. We're going to set name and set description. Now, these are a little different because they do not return a value. Since they don't return a value, they are void. Null and void. All right. And so here, check this out. So if we want to set the name of an object, and we're probably going to want to do that if we have this default constructor that gives it no name or description, right? Or we may want to change names. We may want to allow that, in which case we need to do it. But notice this little thing called this. This is referring to whatever particular entity we're dealing with. And it allows us to create a unique, setting of the name. Now, we didn't have to do it in our constructor. It already knew to do that. And we don't have to do it in any of our accessor methods. But the mutator, also known as setter methods, we do need to specify we're going to set this name to this, which is or I'm sorry, to name, which is what we passed it in here. Do the same thing for set description, and Android did the rest for us. Wasn't that kind? So now that we have this, we're going to go ahead and test this out. But just as a review, you have accessor methods, we have mutator methods. Accessor methods are also called getter methods, so they're interchangeable. Same thing goes with setter methods. That's another word for mutator method. So we have get name and set name. We have get description and set description. Our mutator methods are always void because they send nothing out. And then our getter methods do have a return value, so we have to declare what value they return. And basically, we've coded the entire entity class. This is it in its entirety. We're basically done with it. And in future videos, we're going to actually take entity and create specialized entities like entity containers and agents and items. And they're all going to be based on entities.
Fun stuff.
Exactly. Just riveting, right? So now that we can actually access not only the name, the description, but we can even set it, okay? We're going to go ahead and when we create our next entity object, we're going to have entity thing2 equals new entity thing2. And of course, thing2 is also a fun-loving thing with wild hair. Make sure we have our little semicolon. We're going to hit enter after the comma. Excuse me. Okay. And then on our output, let's adjust it a little bit. So we're going to put output plus equals, and we're going to create a new line. And now we're going to use thing get description. Okay. And we're going to add to our output again. Now, here we go. We're going to also add our second entity. Oh, wait, we don't have it yet. Well, we do. Actually, I'm sorry. We have it all set. What am I saying? Okay, it's already up there. And now we're going to learn a little bit about object-oriented programming, and that is each object maintains its own state. What does that mean? What that means is each object can keep track of the values of its own variables. I'm going to need some new lines too. And so let's add 2 new lines here, like so. So the idea that so what we would say is thing and thing2 are each instances of the entity class. They are both entities, but they each have their own state, their own value for name and description. And we'll put a wacky and fun-loving thing with wild hair, so we can distinguish between the two. So they each have their own state. So there's your keyword for the day. You hear someone talking about an object state. They're talking about the values of its variables. Let's test it out and see how that works. And it just got finished loading, and check it out. We have our first entity, thing1, description, fun-loving thing with wild hair. We have another entity, thing2, a wacky and fun-loving thing with wild hair. So notice each of them has their own state. Each object can maintain the values of its own variables. So we would say that thing and thing2 are each what we would call software objects. A software object is a real-life or not really real life, but is an instance of a class. A particular, an instance is the only word I can think of at this point. Now we can rename this to thing1 because I think it makes a little bit more sense, but we have to make sure we change it in all of these. Okay, but the point is each software object has its own state. In object-oriented programming, that's what it's all about. Now, the nice thing about object-oriented is anything we can think of in terms of objects that have both like attributes like name and description and have behavior. In this case, there's really no behavior going on other than we can get name and description. But on later objects, we're going to give it behavior like attack or get or take or whatever, or give or move or whatever. So we'll come up with some behavior for some of our objects that allow us to sort of the user to interact with them and do some other things with it. So object-oriented programming is great for this kind of a thing. So stay tuned for later tutorials, and we'll go over this and keep talking about these concepts and using these terms to help you understand object-oriented programming. Thanks for watching.